I ended up in the hospital last year and no one knew what was wrong with me. And that's very scary when you're sitting in a hospital bed and doctors come in every day and say, you can't leave yet because we don't know what's wrong with you. And so it made me stop and realize like how fragile it all is and how easily it can all be taken away, and to really just like savor every moment. I went in the hospital one day and I started meeting all these people and hearing their stories and asking them how they were doing. And I just fell in love with it, and it changed everything for me.
If you would like to share, what is probably one of the most deepest conversations you had with somebody?
We had a group of like 4 or 5 people, all female except for one male. The facilitator, the artist in residence, was doing a painting and it was butterflies. He said, I don't want to do that. And I said, okay, well, what do you want to do? And he said, can I just get a canvas? Can I get black paint and red paint? And for 2 hours, he painted this entire canvas black, except for a little like window in the corner and a red balloon. And he said nothing that entire time.
You can interpret this in any way that you want. It's a very open-ended question. And the question is, what do you want?
I want, in all honesty, I don't know why you're so good at this, but
as I do more and more of these conversations, I begin to think that we all have a story to tell, and we shouldn't be afraid to share our story, and we shouldn't be feeling like we have to hide who we are sometimes. I think having emotions is a more than normal thing to do. I think that talking about certain subjects that may be uncomfortable to talk about aren't so uncomfortable to talk about, and they're things that are needed to be heard. And in this conversation that you're about to hear, I think that we address the normalities of what we go through on a day-to-day basis, what we think about on a day-to-day basis, and that we shouldn't be afraid to show who we are, and we shouldn't be afraid to express ourselves. It was very interesting. Before we started this podcast, I asked you how you were doing, and you said you couldn't complain, and I think you gave me your honest answer. I want you to dig a little bit more deeper on that, on why you decided to say, I can't complain.
I think it's a couple things. Like, one, I feel like life is really good right now. So I really have nothing to complain about if I'm being honest with myself. And the second, I feel like that question's always such a loaded question that sometimes people ask it and they don't actually want the answer. And so it's one of those things where like, well, I mean, I could complain, but like, do you care? So I always say I have no complaints when I don't have any complaints, like I or if it's relative to what we're talking about. I think it's a truthful answer that I don't have anything to complain about.
I really love that answer, because that's really one of my favorite questions to ask. And I know it's so overly used now, especially like whenever we meet somebody new, we're always like, oh, hey, how are you doing? Or, how are you feeling? In perspective, though, I think when you give that honest answer, you really get to know the person a little bit better. For the people who don't know who you are, Richard, it's very interesting because things did come full circle around with the episode we did a long time ago on an old podcast that I used to have. But for the people who don't know you and the things that you do, can you just give me a little bit of your backstory, a little bit about yourself, where you come from, and the things that you're doing now, and what mission are you on, most importantly?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we first met, I was hosting a talk show. That's what I wanted to do since I was 10 years old. I wanted to be a talk show host like every 10-year-old boy, I suppose. And I got to do that for 6 years. I created my own show and I did everything around it. And it was amazing. And I think that was really what I should be doing with my life is showcasing other people who are doing great things, which is what I do now. Pretty much, I run a nonprofit based in San Antonio, Texas, and we hire local creatives, professional creatives, and we go into hospitals and We work with the adult patients, the healthcare staff, and their family members, and we give them an opportunity to express themselves creatively, whether they're in a good mood, a bad mood. And that's also kind of where you were talking about, like, how are you? That's most of my job. Most of our job at Heartseed Art is seeing how people are and meeting them where they are, like not changing if a patient is in a bad mood. We're not there to make them in a good mood necessarily. We're there to walk alongside them in however they're feeling.
What is one of the biggest, I guess, feedbacks or things in life? I mean, you see, life has a beginning, life has an end. And so when you're doing these visits to hospitals and things like that, what is probably one of the most touching things that these patients let out to you, or they tell you and express themselves to you? What is probably one of those hard moment things that you usually have with a patient when they're there?
I think what I was most surprised, I've been doing this since 2018, and I think what shocked me the most when I first started was that we work with people who may not ever leave the hospital. They might die there. And oftentimes when they are leaving, it's to go home on hospice. So we work with a lot of people who are at the end of their lives, or they're fighting for their lives in the worst time of their life, and they still want to laugh and they still want joy. And I think that was such a shift for me. I assumed I was going to go into hospital rooms and it was just going to be sad and everyone was going to be crying. And that happens, but most of the time, they still want to enjoy the time they have left. And that was a huge shift for me in my personal life of like, you need to take advantage of this and you need to celebrate how healthy you are and the life you have. Because, I mean, I ended up in the hospital last year for 3 weeks randomly and ended up having 4 surgeries and had a fungal infection that they still don't know how I got. And no one knew what was wrong with me. And that's very scary when you're sitting in a hospital bed and doctors come in every day and say, you can't leave yet because we don't know what's wrong with you. And we don't know how to fix it. And so it made me stop and realize like how fragile it all is and how easily it can all be taken away, and to really just like savor every moment.
You mentioned something really interesting right now, and what I want to talk about too is you started this in 2018, right? When you first became involved in it?
Yes. Yeah.
So right now you mentioned that it had a perspective in yourself on your personal life. You also mentioned in the form that I sent out to you that 2018 to around 2022 was an interesting period in your life. Can you kind of walk me through those years from when you joined this, the year 2018, and the purpose behind how that had an impact in your personal perspective on doing this?
Yeah. I got married in 2015, moved to Maryland with my ex-husband now. He's in the military. He got stationed in San Antonio, so we moved to San Antonio in September. I didn't have a job. I was there as the military spouse. And a few months later, we were in the middle of a divorce. And I was in this brand new state, this brand new city, no friends, no job, no nothing. And I'd moved out of our house and I was in this tiny little apartment by myself without an income. And I thought, this was not supposed to be my life. Like, what am I doing? You don't get married to get divorced. And suddenly I was in my 30s and I was single. Like, it just was mind blowing to me that this was all happening. And I grew, like, I was a theater major. I had my show. I had all of these like artistic people in my life. And I thought, you know what? I'm done sitting around crying. I'm going to take myself out to the theater and I'm going to get a ticket to a show and I'm going to go see something and laugh. And I walked in the theater and I knew some people who worked there and they said, I want to introduce you to someone. They have a booth here. And it was the founder of Heartseed Art. And she was sitting there on this little table with this crappy little cardboard sign that she had made at home. And I thought, oh, this poor woman needs help. Like, she's trying to do this all by herself. And it's just so sad. So I I was hosting my show at the time, and I had her on as a guest, and we made art and talked about the nonprofit, and she went her way and I went mine. And, I was back at my apartment feeling sorry for myself. And I thought, I don't have a job, and I was looking for a job, and I should volunteer for something. Like, I need to spend my time wisely. And so I filled out a volunteer application on their website. And 2 seconds later, she emailed me and she was like, "Is this Richard Wilmore?" And I said, "Yes." And we went out for coffee. And I didn't know, because I grew up around hospitals. My dad got really sick with cancer when I was young, and is still going through cancer treatments. That was in 1992. So he's been doing that all my life practically. And I didn't know if I could be in a hospital and around that. So I was like, I'll run your social media and I'll make social media posts for you. And that's kind of as close as I want to get. And I went in the hospital one day and I started meeting all these people and hearing their stories and asking them how they were doing. And I just fell in love with it. And it changed everything for me. One, I realized what arts and health was. I didn't even know what it was. And then I didn't realize that I was doing it in my own life. I was going to the theater. I was listening to music. I was around it all the time. And I'm lucky enough that I get to be around it every day. And I feel like my life is completely different than it was prior to that.
Growing up, I'm trying to put this in a perspective of my own, and what you're doing now really did come full circle. So you grew up seeing your dad mostly around hospitals. Now you're working in a nonprofit who focuses on helping people in the hospitals. Walk me through that full circle and kind of how you see it, as far as like, this was something you always saw your dad struggle with. Now you're able to make a change in that, or even change, like you mentioned earlier, bring laughter and joy to people, maybe sometimes on their darkest days. Give me your perspective on that. How do you see that? What emotions run through you as you're doing that?
I remember being in second grade, and I remember sitting at my grandma and grandpa's table eating spaghetti and meatballs. And the hospital that my dad went to was like 3 hours away. And I remember them coming through the door and crying so hard and saying that he has cancer. And I didn't know what that meant. I was in second grade. I just knew that sounds awful. And everyone's crying so hard. I didn't know if he was dying. I didn't know what that meant. And then as he spent more time in hospitals and I became familiar with what cancer was, I thought, one day I just want to be famous and I want to start a cancer charity. Like that was my second grade brain, was like, that'll be easy. I'll just get famous and start this. And so to get to work with people who I wish I had access to seems like, I feel so lucky that I get to provide that, because I wish that's what I had. And I love being able to provide something that I missed out on. I think it's so, I feel so grateful that I get to provide that for people. And it just feels like it didn't happen how I thought it was going to happen. I didn't become a famous talk show host and get to start it, but it's the same vision, just in a different view. And I just I pinch myself every day.
I'm really curious about this because, I really love stories, and I really love seeing how somebody went through what they went through in their life. And so what is probably one of the, if you would like to share, what is probably one of the most deepest conversations you had with somebody while you were doing this that still sticks with you till today, and that you still ponder and wonder what they meant or what they're trying to portray or say?
So I think my probably favorite story is, we used to do group classes, and we had a group of 4 or 5 people, all female except for one male. And he came in and he sat down, and the facilitator, the artist in residence, was doing a painting, and it was butterflies. And he said, "I don't want to do that." And I said, "Okay, well, what do you want to do?" And he said, can I just get a canvas? Can I get black paint and red paint? And I said, yes. And a paintbrush. And he picked out the tiniest paintbrush. And for 2 hours, he painted this entire canvas black, except for a little like window in the corner and a red balloon. And he said nothing that entire time. And he finished and he gave it to us because we used to hang the artwork in the hallways of the hospital so people can see it. And he left. And I thought, I don't know the story behind this. I don't know what he was feeling, but it was what he needed that day and that moment. And he ended up leaving the hospital and he was doing infusions at the outpatient clinic. So I went and got his painting and we framed it and I gave it to him and told him how much it meant to us that he allowed us to be in that space with him. And I never heard anything, the backstory of that, but I think about that all the time of like, I was able to give him space to feel comfortable enough to get that emotion out of him and put it on that canvas.
That runs a lot of emotions through me as I'm thinking about it and I'm trying to picture the story that you're telling me. How do you interpret that? I mean, he paints a black canvas and then a white balloon. What do you think he was trying to say? How did you interpret that?
I don't know. I never really... I see so much that I try not to take a lot of it in because it can be so overwhelming. You hear so many stories, we provide art and music and writing, but we also just talk to people. So much of it is just giving people space to talk about something other than why they're in the hospital. And so it's a delicate little dance to give them the space for that, but not to like take it on as our own emotions. And so no matter what people are writing or painting, I feel like I never know, and I don't want to make up stories of people because I don't want to put any emotion into myself that like, I don't want to make up their story. I want to just let them have their story. And so, I don't know, it seemed just, I don't even know. I don't know. It gives me goosebumps every time I look at that painting. I actually was just editing a video and putting that picture in it. And it seems so sad to me, but it also feels like there's a reason why that window is there. And there's that opening. And that, I don't know. I would love to talk to him about it, but I also, that was his experience.
Real quick, I want to cut into the conversation and say thank you to everybody listening right now, to listening to the conversations that we have with our guests, to following the podcast and being engaged with the podcast. I can't tell you how much that means the world to me and the team for you to give an hour of your day to listen to these stories, to follow the podcast, to listen to these conversations. You can be doing anything else with that 1 hour, but for some reason you chose to come here and listen to these conversations. So I'm very grateful and thank you.
I'm thinking about how I would interpret it too. And I mean, to me, the first thing that I think about is with art, and I really love the initiative you're taking, because with art, right now I have in this room just in front of me, I have a bunch of paintings. You see some behind me, but it's their own way of how artists can cope with their emotions, their feelings. They're having the worst day. Maybe somebody just passed away and they draw this on a piece of canvas and that's how they tell their story. They don't necessarily need to tell it to anybody. They don't necessarily need to go and, probably posting it on social media is the worst way to go about it. But the way that they just take their own space, their own time, like away from the whole world and put what's in their mind into a piece of paper, a canvas. I think that's really interesting. So when I think about this painting in the way that you're describing it and on what he was going through, I think about it as like, no matter what you're going through, I think there's a little bit of light at the end of everything, There's always going to be that darkness around the world, but you have some type of light or a purpose that you paint yourself white because you're thinking about that everything that you've been through in your life or in your journey is bright, that you don't regret anything. It's kind of how I'm interpreting it. And it's funny because yesterday we had my last guest yesterday, he told us a story about an individual who, I mean, in the worst car crash that he was in, the one thing that he reached for was a Bible inside of his jacket, and everything was bloody. You know, the whole car was wrecked, but he went in and he reached for a Bible. And so that gets you thinking in different perspectives of like, what is the ending to when somebody knows that they're not going to no longer live or that they're passing away? What do you see? I guess that's my question now to you, is like, what do you usually see as how people interpret death, and they know they're probably going to pass away or they're probably going to die soon? And how do you see them act in their final moments?
I was in a we were once in a hospital, like cleaning up after a class, and a guy walked by and stuck his head in the door, and he said, "Hey, I'm going home." And I said, "That's awesome." And he said, "Yeah, I'm going home on hospice, but I'm still going home." And the only thing that came out of my mouth was like, "That sucks." Because there was nothing good to tell him, you know, like there was no, well, maybe things will change. And so I just said, "That sucks." And he goes, "Yeah, it does, but like, I'm at least getting out of here." And I was like, "Yeah, that's true." And I said, what are you going to do when you get home? Like, what's your plan?" And he got so excited talking about all the stuff he wanted to do when he went home. And he left smiling, even though he knew he was going home to die. And I thought that's the way to go. You know, like I always think it's interesting that we all know, like, there's no other way to get out of here but death, and we're all so scared of it because it's unknown and it's so sad. But also, like, how do we prepare ourselves and like our families for it, because it's inevitable. And he just had the best attitude in that moment of like, I'm still going to go home and I'm going to do some fun stuff, but I also know why I'm going home. And so that, I don't know, it's that moment changed the way I think about death, or at least how I try to process it when my own family members are ill or, you know, my loved ones are dying.
I'm going home. That's really interesting. And you can take that in many ways, as like, he knew he was physically going home, but he also knew he was, you know, going home, and he called it home. Do you fear death? Is death something that you fear?
So last year I ended up with a fungal infection that they don't really know how I got, and we can go into that because it was, I got a COVID booster, and the COVID booster site got infected. And then it just went through my entire body, and my hand was swollen, and I went to the doctor, and he said, "What are you doing here, and why are you not in the emergency room? And I need you to leave here right now before you die." That's what he said to me. And so we ran over to the emergency room, and I got admitted to the hospital. And for 3 weeks, I went through 4 surgeries, and every day I was told, "We don't know what's going on." And I kept thinking, I'm not going to leave here. Like, I don't know what I don't know what's happening, but I don't think I'm getting out of here, because they can't figure out what's wrong with me. And because of that, they don't know how to fix it. And so I kind of like, I was scared to death. And anytime someone would bring it up, I would cry instantly. Like, I had no problem crying, but I also was oddly calm the entire time. Like, all the nurses loved coming in my rooms because I would joke with them. And I got to a point where I was like, if this is it, like, I guess this is it. And I feel like I was really happy. I was very happy with my life. And I thought, well, I guess, you know, like, if this is when I'm supposed to die, I can't fight that. And so thankfully I didn't. And I'm very happy for that. But there was a moment during that entire time that I thought, if this is it, I guess this is how I'm going to die. And I was very thankful that I wasn't in pain. Like for everything that was going on with me, I wasn't hurting. And so I thought at least I'm not suffering. And I don't know if like when it actually comes time, if that's how I'll be, but that's how it felt in that moment of like, okay, well, you know, if this is the plan for me, then I guess this is the plan. And I can't, me crying and begging and that's not going to change it. So I kind of just went with it. And then they let me go and they still don't know what was wrong with me, but I'm here.
That's interesting. One of the biggest things that I really want to touch on is as I'm reading through the story you sent me and as I'm hearing you talk and I'm trying to piece two to two together, I tend to now understand a little bit more on my own version on how art connects with health. And the way that I'm thinking about it is I really love touching on this subject because I think it's a very important subject to talk about. And it's something I probably always bring up in every conversation that I have with a guest is mental health. And the reason I bring it up is because, like I mentioned before we started the episode, a lot of people are scared to talk about their emotions, talk about their anxiety or depression because they think their friends are going to make fun of them. They think that the world is going to bash on them, you know. But the way I always looked at it too is like with artwork, that really helps with mental health. Can you talk to me a little bit about your interpretation or the way that you would explain arts and mental health and how they kind of coincide with one another?
Yeah, I think what's great about any of the arts, really, painting, music, writing, dance, it's a way to not talk about what's going on, but still to get it out of your body. There's something about moving it, getting it, releasing it, getting out of your body that actually gets those feelings out of you. Writing it down, there are studies that proves that writing things down, writing your emotions down releases that. And I think that's what, you know, so many people, especially adults, are afraid to talk about feelings. And there are ways to express your feelings without sitting across from someone and talking about it. And it kind of gives you a barrier, you know, a little bit of a wall where you're not having to talk to someone, but you're still able to express what you're going through. And it doesn't always have to be with an end product of, you know, being prescribed something. Like I always think of like, we go into hospitals and we work with people in hospitals, but like, what would happen if you were doing art of any kind before you ended up in the hospital? Like if you're integrating it into your everyday life, there are health benefits to that before you get sick.
I believe that's why the biggest main reason why a diary is called a diary, because you're writing things down, you're becoming a writer, and you're also expressing your emotions and everything that's going on in your life. And so I like how you put that together. It's like, have you ever just probably tried doing art before you went into that situation? And I think that's another one of the most interesting questions that I want to ask you is, in doing all of this and doing all of this for the nonprofit, a lot of the times people don't see that you also are a human and that you are also going through these challenges yourself. You know, they might see you as a superhero. They might say, man, whenever I see Richard, he's going to be the guy that makes me laugh. He's going to be the guy that brings me happiness. He's going to be the guy that just, you know, brings more life to me. Was there ever a moment, if you want to share, where there wasn't as much life in you, where there was probably one of the darkest moments in your life?
Gosh, I have many of them. When I have like from my childhood was very traumatic in a lot of ways. So I only have like flashes of different things of my childhood. But there, gosh, I'm trying to think of like the worst time. I think it would probably be sitting alone after like going through my divorce, and I just didn't, like, nothing seemed real anymore. Like, I didn't feel like I didn't know where to go. I didn't know what to do. I had, like, it felt like nothing was worth living for, really, like I had nothing. I was just alone. And I've never felt that alone before. My family was across the country. I had no friends in the area. I had nothing to do but sit. And it was like going through the pandemic, but before the pandemic, where you're just home alone. And I thought, I'm never going to survive this. How do I get out of this? And it took me a long time to, like, figure out, like, take care of yourself first and do what makes you happy. And that's why I started volunteering. That's why I started going out to theater, to find myself, because I felt so lost, because that was not part of my plan, was to suddenly be going through a divorce and alone in the middle of it, so that was probably one of the darkest moments. I think there were also probably a lot of moments growing up, when my parents weren't around a lot, because they spent so much time in hospitals, and it felt sort of like we were these abandoned little kids that didn't really have parents because they were just sick, and we didn't know if my dad was going to die or if we were going to have money to pay for groceries. And in moments where I feel alone and helpless, like where I can't, I don't know the answer. I'm a fixer. I like to fix things. I like to make people laugh. I like to make sure everyone's having a good time. And when I'm not having a good time, it's really tough for me, because I have to take the time to figure out how to get out of it in a healthy way. And that takes time, and that's scary for a lot of people.
I think that is tough. I think that's really tough. A lot of the conversations that I've had was probably what made them the person they are today is because of all the traumatic, unsure experiences that they've faced when they were children. And so I think when you're a child and you're still trying to figure out how to navigate life, you can't do much. And I like how you explained it, where you might feel helpless because you're a child. I mean, you can't even drive. You can't really buy anything. You don't have a bank account. You don't have anything, right? You're still a kid, but you're going through these experiences. At that moment, did you know as a child that you were experiencing those moments, or did you think that was probably a part of life? Or how did you interpret all that as a child? Like, what was running through your mind that now you think about it and you're like, do you wish that you can change that? Do you feel like you maybe had to go through those moments to become the person you are today?
I feel like I grew up really quickly. Like, I have always been very, like, motherly to people. Like, I'm very, like, I love family. I love everyone feeling comfortable. I remember not knowing what to do when there was, like, chaos in the household and my parents weren't around. And I remember making sure, I'm the middle child. I have an older brother and a younger brother. And I remember getting their clothes ready for school the next day. So at least I knew that my brothers knew what to wear or didn't have to worry about that. Like, I worry about other people probably too much and how they feel. And I thought, how can I help? And that in my little brain was like, well, I'll help by preparing their clothes. And I don't know, I feel like that's always carried me. Like, how that's my first instinct is like, how can I help you, but in a meaningful way,
If there's something you know now that you wish you would have known when you were a younger child, what is that one thing that you know now that you wish you would have known?
That you're going to be okay. I didn't know I was going to be okay. I was bullied growing up. I grew up in a very small town, and I was not the athlete. I was not the jock. I was the closeted gay kid who didn't even know he was gay, but everybody else did. And I grew up being told how awful that was to be gay. And I didn't even know what that was, but I figured, well, if they're telling me that I am, then I must be. And that's a really bad thing. And so I wish I would have known that, that it's going to be okay, and that you're going to be okay, and that life is actually going to be really good. And that's part of why I wanted to start my show when I did, because I had that show. I had the Rosie O'Donnell show growing up, where there was that hour of just fun and you felt safe there. No matter if you were a guest, if you were an audience member, if you were watching at home, you just felt safe. And I wanted to create that because I wanted to give that to someone else, because I knew how much that meant to me. So I wanted to create that space.
Going back to talking about the show, I remember when you were talking about it to me a while back when we did that the first interview, the first conversation that we had. Do you think now, moving forward from that moment till now, do you think that maybe you were doing that show to mask what you were facing in reality?
Yeah, yes. I had this conversation with someone recently. I think that entire show was a distraction for me, because I was unhappy in my life, and but I had so much fun doing that show that I was like, I have to do this because I need arts and health. Like, that's what it was for me. And so I had to create it myself. And it was a complete distraction from what was happening in the real world. And I loved that it was still a place that people loved coming to, and that I could create that for people. But yeah, and then I stopped my show after I got out of the hospital, because sitting in the hospital made me realize, like, well, what am I doing with my life? Like, what am I here for? And it made me realize, like, I don't need to be the center of attention. Like, I never wanted my show or anything I'm doing to really be about me. Even when we talked on podcasts, I'm like, are you sure you want me, or do you want like one of our artists to come on and talk to you? Like, because I feel like people have such great stories, but it made me realize I didn't want to be in the spotlight, and that I wanted to just provide a space for other people to be in the spotlight. And then a couple of months later, I ended up stepping into the CEO role of Hearts New York.
There's two things that I was thinking about as you were mentioning that, and what you were saying before that. And these are two different questions. You can choose to answer these separately or together. And the first question is, when you came out to everybody about being gay, was that a tough situation for you to do? How did you come out as that? And also, now the second question would be, what is the definition of true happiness for you? And I always think that's an interesting question to ask, because a lot of people can interpret it in their own way of what happiness really is. If you were to define it in your own way, what is that?
So my, like, I guess coming out story is kind of odd. So I grew up in northern Wisconsin. That's where I'm from. I went to school in Milwaukee, and I had a group of friends that I brought home to visit, and we all went out to the local bar and had too many drinks, and with my brother and sister-in-law, and we came back to the house, and we were sitting in the kitchen eating, and my friend blurted out, "Richard doesn't date girls." And because she was like, I'm so, like, people, they probably already know. And my brother and sister-in-law said, well, yeah, we know. And then everyone went to bed, and we never talked about it. And then a week later, my brother called me and said, hey, I just want you to know, we remember what was said, and we still love you, and we're not surprised, and it's okay. And then I thought, well, crap. If he knows, that means my parents have to know, because I want it to come from me and not more gossip. So I called my parents and I told them, and my mom started crying. And I was like, why are you crying? And she said, well, I've been waiting since you were 3, which makes sense. I was obsessed with The Wizard of Oz. I was Dorothy for Halloween, like, duh. But my biggest thing was, like, I didn't want to disappoint my grandma. We're very close to my grandparents, and I didn't want to, I just didn't want to disappoint her. And when my mom told my grandma, she was sad, and my mom was like, well, why? And she said, well, I always thought Richard would be a really good dad. And my mom said, well, I think he still plans on having kids. And she said, oh, okay. And then that was it. And then it was just like, nothing ever happened. Um, and going home that first time after that, where there was just complete acceptance and no one questioned, like, it was just out there, like there was nothing. It was the same me. You just knew one more thing about me. Like, I wasn't any different. I was still gay before you knew I was gay or before I told you. And so nothing had changed. And that was probably a definition of happiness for me, where there was so much weight, physical weight on me because of it, mental weight. I was out of shape. I was unhealthy. There's so much that you hold when you're holding that big of a secret. And that to me probably was one of the, like, feeling completely free, feeling completely happy. And I think over the last couple of years, I've realized taking care of yourself makes me very happy, and giving myself space. And the fact that I can now walk my dogs around the community and be in awe of just the sunrise every day and the sunset when I walk them at night, and the little things throughout the day make me realize, like, what true happiness is for me. Is just that, like, feeling completely relaxed and loved.
This is something interesting that came up into conversation on, like, my last guest, and that's because he felt that he probably had to hide his emotions with his family. My question to you now is, why did you feel like they were going to get disappointed if they knew? Why did you feel like you had to hide it?
Because my family never talked about it until I came out. So the only things I ever heard about being gay were super negative. So I thought it was really bad to be gay. I didn't know it was an okay thing. I thought I was going to be rejected because I had been getting rejected in school by other strangers, basically. And so my perception was that being gay was really bad, and I didn't want to disappoint anybody.
One of the most interesting questions that I have is, looking back at everything that you've been through, everything that happened between the divorce and with your father and the show and then coming out, is there anything that you regret doing or not doing? Is there anything that, living now in the moment, that you look back at and you're just like, do I regret this, or I don't regret this because it shaped me to the person I am?
I mean, I wouldn't say I regret it. I wish I would have accepted myself earlier. I don't necessarily regret that I didn't, because that's not going to help anything. But I do wish that I could have been prouder of myself earlier on.
I love that. I love what you just said about accepting yourself. I feel like a lot of people aren't happy with themselves, that they have to put on a different mask on social media, and they have to have the most fanciest shoes or the most fanciest posts on social media, the most followers, the most likes. And a lot of the times I think that brings a lot of unhappiness and a lot of insecurities into somebody. What I want to know from you, and this is something that I always love asking, is how do you perceive those who maybe think that they have to act a certain way for other people to accept them, or for them to look a certain way so that they have friends? And maybe one of the biggest things I think is that a lot of the times we can't cope with being alone, and sometimes being alone is a good thing. A lot of people think that they get anxiety or social anxiety because they feel like they need to be a part of a friend group that may be negative towards them, right? A negative environment for them. What would you say to that about people who maybe are acting a certain way and not being true to themselves? What would you say to those individuals?
It's so tough because there's so much, like you said, there's just so much incoming that, like, you don't know what's real and what's not. I was the person who was always afraid to do anything alone, because I didn't want people looking at me and wondering why I was out by myself and why no one was hanging out with me. But the day I went to court to finalize my divorce, I took myself out to lunch and I sat there and I ordered a meal and I thought, I'm going to sit in this restaurant by myself and I am going to not look at my phone. I'm going to eat this and enjoy this meal. And I mean, I think I was sweating the entire time because I was nervous, but it also like broke a wall down of like, oh, you can do stuff by yourself. Like, it's okay. I mean, I took myself to the theater. That's how I ended up right here. Um, like, I don't know. It's really figuring out if you're happy in whatever way that is. If it is being happy because you're around people all the time, if it is because you like being home and you don't want to go out past 7 o'clock, like, it's okay. If you're happy with your life, like, don't let anybody try to tell you that what you're doing is wrong if you're not hurting anyone or anything. Like, I get that all the time, really, from people who think I'm crazy for working from home. From like, I like being home. It's my like, I like going out. I like having fun, but I also like to go to bed at 9 o'clock, and I don't feel bad about that.
If you could share one untold story that you've never shared before, what would that story be?
I don't think it's completely untold, but not a lot of people know that they're about the very big turning point in my life was the time I tried to commit suicide, and I was young and I was just like, the bullying was out of control. I was unhappy. I just like nothing was going right in my childhood brain. And the only reason I didn't was because I thought that my mom would be so hurt, and I didn't want to see my mom cry any more than she already had because of everything that we were going through as a family. And I thought, well, I don't want to make it worse for her. And so then I went and told her, and that's when I started seeing a therapist for the first time. And that was the first person I told that I was gay, and that just completely changed the course of my life. To say that out loud to someone who was not there to judge, who I knew wouldn't take it any other way than a positive. And that was a big moment for me when I admitted that I needed help and that I couldn't do it by myself.
Thank you for sharing that, because that, I feel like there's a lot of people, and I know there's listeners out here that we have that sometimes go through a lot of those moments where it goes back to the fact of feeling alone with your thoughts and feeling alone with yourself. And so part of these conversations that I'm having and part of this podcast is because it's more bringing awareness to these subjects, these questions that are probably hard to ask and uncomfortable to share, but they're really helpful in the most part to hear it and to know that you're not the only one going through these type of things. What I want to ask is, what is your ultimate mission in life? What is your purpose?
I feel like I am here to give people a space to tell their story in whatever way they want to tell their story. And the same thing you're doing, like, you start connecting the dots with everybody else. And we go through that a lot in the hospital, where you're sitting in a hospital room and you think you're the only one there. And when you start seeing other people a door away who are going through the same thing, and they have similar stories, and you start connecting with people. And I love that I get to provide a space for that in a safe, non-judgmental area, and that everyone, I get told that, I guess, a lot. Like, you make it so, like, when I interview someone, you make it so easy and you make it so comfortable. And that's what it's about, of like connecting with people. I get to meet strangers every day through what I do. And I feel like there's always something you can connect with someone, no matter who they are. You just have to give them the opportunity. I was told once, when I first started going into the hospital, a patient had died, and that their wife wanted his artwork from the classes he had. And so they called me, the social worker called me and said, "Hey, can you meet her? She wants this art." And I thought, this woman's husband just died. Like, what? How do I do this? And so I called the founder, and I was like, "Listen, I don't get paid enough for this, so you need to walk me. You need to walk me through this." And the advice she gave me was, go in with a closed mouth and open ears. And I am a talker, and I like to, try to change the situation and make people feel better. And I walked in there, and I just gave the woman a hug, and I said, "I'm so sorry." And then I just let her talk. And she cried, and she told me stories of her husband and how thankful he was to have Hearts Need Art, and how thankful she was to have Hearts Need Art, because it gave him something to do when she wasn't around. And it just, like, that was, I don't know, 4 years ago, and I still think about that moment, because it was like, yes, this is my purpose, is to give people that space.
I like what you just mentioned. A lot of times we do need that. Just go in there with a quiet mouth and open ears. And it really is that simple. I think it's as simple as just listening to people. I think a lot of times we don't listen. And that's why maybe people tend to hide themselves in the shadows, or maybe feel uncomfortable about sharing by themselves, because they feel like there's nobody that's going to listen. And even at your worst times, like being in the hospital and knowing that you may not live for the next day, but you still are wanting that moment to be heard. I think it's very important. Richard, before I let you
loud. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
Like, everything's so loud, like social media is loud, TV's, everything's so in your face, and who can be more ridiculous to get views, and like all of this, like, there's such like a showmanship in the virtual world. And like, even down to like celebrities, are who can be in the most ridiculous outfit and whose video, like, and sometimes it's just shutting up for 10 minutes and actually listening to someone and letting someone hold space. And maybe that's complete silence, but that's giving them some breathing room. And I love that I get to do that.
Richard, I love the mission that you're on. I love the nonprofit that you're a part of. I love that you're the leader of it. I feel like you're the right person to lead this thing, because you truly understand what a human goes through. I always put it at this, that at the end of the day, we all bleed red, right? Celebrities don't bleed a different color. Celebrities aren't immune to anything. We saw it during the pandemic and COVID. We had a lot of celebrities pass away because of it. And so at the end of the day, we're all human. At the end of the day, we're all here to help one another. The more that we're able to share these stories, the more that we're able to just give an ear out to hear and listen to these people that, want to express themselves, because it might be their first time expressing themselves and sharing these stories. I think it's very important. The Arts and Health Initiative, I think it's something really special, because I've always been a lover for art, and I've always been a lover for mental health and supporting that cause, something that I've always struggled with. And so, like I said, when you coincide both of them together, I think it can create something beautiful. And like the story you shared in the beginning about the guy that just painted a black canvas with the white balloon, it's more than just a painting. It's more than just an expression. It's probably them writing their whole life story in one picture. And it's crazy to think about. One of the one of our closing traditions here is that we have our previous guest leave a question for our next guest, not knowing who our next guest is going to be. And so our previous guest was just a guest that left me speechless. And he asked this simple question to you. And you can interpret this in any way that you want. It's a very open-ended question. And the question is, what do you want?
The sarcastic part of me wants to say, I want my house to be painted finally, because I'm in the middle of painting it and it's driving me insane that all these rooms are half painted. What do I want? I want, gosh, I have so many things suddenly that are in my head of what I want. Like, I want to be more confident in my abilities. I sometimes go through like imposter syndrome. I want everybody to have access to the arts, because I know firsthand how powerful that is. And I want people to also like understand what it is. And it's such simple stuff like the music you listen to when you wake up in the morning, like to know why you're doing that, why you turned on that song, because it puts you in a really good mood. It wakes you up. And that it doesn't have to be expensive to do it. I want, I want, in all honesty, I don't know why you're so good at this, but, I want my family to get along. There's a lot of turmoil there that makes me really sad, but, and I want my parents to know how much I love them. And I don't get to see them a lot. And yeah, I want them to like, I want them to die knowing how much they meant to me.
It is a very tough question. It's a very big open-ended question. I can't even know where to start on how I want to answer that either. Because it's so simple, but it's such a question that just gets you thinking about every wrong in life and every good in life and how those two coincide with one another.
Yeah.
It's different. Richard, I want to really, really thank you for sharing your story here, for sharing a piece of your life here, for coming on here and taking an hour of your time to just have a conversation that I think is really much needed for a lot of our listeners and for a lot of people in general who I really want, the whole message behind this is that I really want people to know that they're not alone. And even in the moments where I might feel alone, I know that there's people that I can go talk to. I know there's things that I can go do. I know that there's, a platform that I have that I got to advocate, that I created to advocate for this. And so I think this is a very powerful thing to do. I want to bring Daniel back up now. And Daniel, if you're there, what is something that I may have missed that you would really love to ask Richard?
Well, I'll tell you something, you didn't miss a lot. There's, again, just like I'd write a question down and get asked and I'd scratch it out. But I got some points, some little points that are, for me personally, semi-big. You talked a lot about about the arts. I am a kid that was in choir. I was in band. I also played football. I played soccer, played basketball. Very involved in all types of things in high school. And throughout my years, when I first started middle school, all the way to high school, I saw the underappreciation in arts. And the sad thing was, I had multiple, outlets. I had sports, I had the arts, and I had a really solid friend group. But some kids don't. Some kids just have that one thing. I would talk to a lot of kids at choir, and that was their friend group. That was their spot. Um, how do we make that thing? How do we make the arts something that isn't underappreciated? It's not something that is overlooked. How can we do that in your point, in your point?
I think we hold the arts up to kids and professionals, and anybody in between is not allowed to do it and call themselves an artist. And I think it's something that everyone needs to do. And you have to figure out like what art form is for you, whether that's cooking, gardening, painting. Like there are a gazillion different art forms. But we hold art to such a high standard that you're only an artist if you can put it in a museum or sell it in a gallery. And it's so much more than that. It's literally, how does the paint feel when you're splashing it across a canvas? Or, how does it feel I call it word vomit. How does it feel to just sit for 5 minutes and write anything that comes out of your head, no matter what it is? It doesn't have to make sense. You don't have to use punctuation. And once we start giving ourselves permission to do that and everybody to do it, then I think we're going to shift the way we think about the arts.
I love that. This kind of goes into my second question. Being in the arts, being able to see all types of students in the band. I wasn't just the only athlete that was also in band. I wasn't the only athlete that was in choir. And I saw some kids that, had some troubles, and their outlook was that art that they were taking, whatever art class, like you said, cooking, choir, band, all the different instruments. How was somebody, you talked a little bit about dark space, and you shared a little bit about the time that you were in a dark spot. How does somebody, it doesn't have to be through the art track, but how could you, from your experience, relay into a young teenager or even an adult, older person? How would the process be to help them get out of that dark space? How would you kind of help navigate it, or how did you personally get out of that? I know you gave us a little bit of an example, but if you could implement a little bit more of that or dive a deeper into that.
Yeah, I found little things that made me feel better, whether that was a TV show or music. I found like I gave myself permission to laugh. Like sometimes when you're in that state, it's just an awful spiral, and sometimes I found myself, looking for disappointment and looking for ways that I could be upset about something, and I know that for me, when I stopped caring about the things that I really cared about, that I needed to speak up for myself. And that's very scary, especially, anybody, any age. It's hard to say, I'm not okay. And don't feel like the first time you say it, you have to say it to someone. Say it to yourself. Because you have to believe that first. You have to believe that you can get help, that you can be better before you can make that change. So I think, start saying it to yourself. This is not a good space for me to be in. I need to figure out how to get out of this. And that doesn't mean that you're going to run and get help that day, but you have to start that conversation with yourself before you can take the next step. At least that's how it was for me. I needed to admit to myself that things are not okay, and they they can be and they should be.
That's it. It's an amazing answer right there. I agree. It is sometimes very challenging to be able to kind of realize or accept that you are in a spot. This kind of sidetracks a little bit from where we're at, but I think it has a little bit of correlation with that. A lot of people for social media, I've seen it quite a bit with social media now and influencers and stuff. There's a big program that's going around, big programming dates. We're meant to make other people happy, right? Influencers, and with that being the mentality of comedians, or what I've heard of comedians, they say, they think I'm funny 24/7, right? They don't realize that it's something that will rehearse and it's something that's planned. They just think that I think at the top of my head and boom, I make a special or things like that. How does one become real with themselves and get out of that like programming or I'm supposed to make everybody happy? Everything around me is supposed to be happy. When deep down, maybe you aren't feeling that way. How does one get out of, how does one become real with themselves in that perspective?
Yeah, I think going back to like comedians, I think most comedians are comedians because that's how they coped with trauma. I know a lot of people are funny because they were sick of laughing and they had to turn it around and make it into something that they could actually cope with and an easier way to deal with it, right? Like, I think it's really important to cry just as much as it's important to laugh. I think those are both very important emotions to have and reactions to have to things. But I think you have to be authentic with yourself, like you can go up like any famous person, any influencer, if it's not real, it's not going to last, or people are going to catch on, like, and then what? And then people catch on that you're not who you said you were. And that can change, like you can be finding yourself through your entire life. You should be evolving and changing and figuring out who you are. And I got that, I get that. Oh, I did when I would have my show. My normal face is just like a normal face and not a smile all the time. And people would always ask why I was mad. And I'm like, that's just my face. Like my face when I'm not talking to you in an interview in front of a camera is just, this is a face. I'm just listening to you. And that gets twisted as like, what's wrong? Literally nothing's wrong. I just am not performing. And we're in such a like performance world right now where everyone has to be on and everyone has to, like everyone has to be watched and seen. And it takes away from who you really are, because no one can be that funny 24 hours a day. No one can be that great of an actor every single movie. No one can, like, you have to just be in tune with yourself and also be okay with like not being ready with a punchline all the time, like being made fun of yourself. You have to like relax, I guess. And that took me a while too, because I always felt like I had to be on. I had to make sure I have all the answers. I had to make sure I had the next question. And sometimes you just don't. And you have to be okay with that. You have to be okay with the good stuff and the bad stuff.
That's a right on the nail answer. And I have two questions that just finish up. One is, after getting out of that dark space, being real with yourself, you're coming into a spot where you want to feel safe. You said the word safe a couple times in the podcast. how does one transition from, getting out of that dark spot, being real with yourself, to the conclusion of safe, you feel safe? How does that transition look for you past that?
I think you have to be comfortable with being alone because there's no one to deflect from what's happening. I think that was a big step for me. Being okay with being home and being alone and not having to be out, not having like, I guess what I can relate it to is like a dog crate, right? Like you can use a dog crate for punishment, or you can use the dog crate where like the dog feels really safe in there and that's their home and that's their bed. And when you give them a treat, they run in there because that's where they feel comfortable, even though they love the entire house. And it takes a long time, for me anyway, to feel safe just being out in public, because for a long time I felt like everyone was, and no one was, I'm sure, but like it felt like everyone was watching me and judging, because that's just how I grew up. Everyone was watching, judging, and talking about me. And so I felt very unsafe. And it didn't change until I didn't care what other people thought anymore. And learning that, like, if they're talking about me, it has nothing to do with me. Literally nothing to do with me. Like, that it says more about someone else and where they are in their life if they can't just say hi and move on. There's no judgment. There's no reason for judgment. And I learned that probably in the hospital. Like, you meet people and you instantly come up with a story in your head of who someone is and what their story is, based on everything, based on looks, based on, how they talk, everything. And I would meet people in the hospital and there would be a judgment right away. And it would be a negative judgment. And then you find out that they run a company and they've been, like they're this, whatever, they have this entire life that you would not think that they had. And they're just like, how amazing everybody is. That's what being in the hospital taught me. First at Hearts Need Art, like just how amazing people are. And realizing like, okay, well, I have cool things happening in my life too. Like I'm okay. And I feel safe existing in the world now. Because I don't care if someone has a negative opinion about me.
I love what it's so true. Something that takes time to accept, but when you accept it, I feel like it's liberating.
Yeah.
My last question, it's Isaac kind of said it, but I'm gonna take it back to the old recording. I like to ask guests this, and if you could change anything in the past since you were born to now, would you change anything? If you would, why, and why not?
I think of two things right away when you said that. I think if I could have changed anything, it would have been finding or getting my dad better help. There was a lot of confusion around the cancer he had. It was very aggressive, and they didn't really know how to treat it, how to fix it, and he lost a lot of his face. He doesn't have an eye or a cheek or half his nose and part of his ear, and there was just a lot of experimentation about how to reconstruct him. And I know there was a lot of pain for him in that, and embarrassment, and it changed how he felt about himself. And so I would change that, and his thinking. And I wish he was more proud of the fact that he actually survived it and that he went through it, and oftentimes with a smile on his face, as opposed to, he's now looking like a completely different person and he doesn't feel like himself. So I would change that. And I would change the length of time it took me to be okay with me. I feel like I missed out on a lot of good stuff, but I'm here now and I'm loving life. So onward.
If you like this conversation, make sure you guys follow the podcast on Apple and Spotify. Make sure you guys subscribe on YouTube. And if you know of any guest who would be a good fit for our podcast, please send me a message. And most importantly, I hope that you take something out of this podcast to put into perspective in your life and maybe help guide you through the journeys that you're facing right now. So thank you.